The lights inside the massive auditorium dimmed slowly as thousands of people settled into their seats, whispering and adjusting their eyes toward the glowing stage. It was another night filled with talent, hopes, and dreams, but no one in the room knew that the next performer would leave them speechless, emotional, and completely transformed. Backstage, a small boy stood silently near the curtains, his slippers worn, his shirt slightly oversized, his hair neatly combed as if someone had lovingly tried to make him presentable. His name was Elijah, a 12-year-old Filipino boy whose life had been anything but easy. He held the microphone gently, almost as if he feared it would slip away. For someone so young, his eyes carried a deep history, stories of struggle, endurance, and silent battles fought far away from any spotlight. Elijah grew up in a tiny coastal village where the walls of his house were patched with whatever material his mother could find after storms tore through their community. His father had been gone for years, and his mother tried her hardest to provide for him and his little sister by working long hours washing clothes for neighbors. Every day, Elijah walked several kilometers to school, sometimes on an empty stomach, but he always hummed. Singing had become his escape, his way of traveling beyond the cracked walls of their home, beyond the hunger, beyond the painful reality. It was his dream to stand on a big stage one day, to sing so powerfully that even the sky would listen. But dreams like his rarely find the right wings. It wasn't until a charity organization visiting their area discovered him singing near the fishing boats that everything changed. They heard a voice so raw, so full of emotion, that they arranged for him to audition for the biggest stage he had ever seen. And now, standing behind the thick curtains of America's Got Talent, Elijah tried to steady his breathing. He could hear the judges' voices faintly, and the loud cheers of the audience after the previous performance. He closed his eyes and whispered a soft prayer in Tagalog, asking for strength, not just for himself, but for his mother, who borrowed money just so he could buy decent clothes for the trip. The backstage producer called his name softly, signaling that it was time. Elijah stepped forward, his small hands trembling, and walked into the light. The golden spotlight poured onto him, making him squint for a moment. The hall that looked small on television now stretched endlessly before him. The audience grew quiet as the judges observed the timid figure standing center stage. Simon leaned forward, curiosity evident on his face. Heidi gave a warm smile. Sophia whispered something to Howie, who nodded with interest. The little boy swallowed hard, adjusting his grip on the microphone. Simon asked him softly where he was from, and his voice shook as he answered, saying he came from the Philippines. The judges smiled encouragingly, and Simon asked what brought him here. Elijah explained that he wanted to sing for his family, to give his mother a better life, and to make his little sister proud. There was no drama in his tone, just sincerity so pure that the entire room fell silent. Simon nodded slowly and asked what song he would perform. Elijah glanced down for a second, then raised his head and said the title clearly, his accent adding a gentle softness. The music began, a soft piano introduction echoing through the hall. Elijah took one deep breath, closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something in him shifted. As the first line left his lips, the entire audience gasped. His voice was not just beautiful, it was enormous, emotional, and cracked open with a maturity no one expected from a 12-year-old boy who looked as fragile as a feather. His tone rose like a wave crashing with feeling, then softened again like a whisper carried by the wind. People leaned forward instinctively, captured by the haunting purity. Simon's eyebrows lifted instantly. Heidi pressed her hand over her heart. Sophia's eyes widened, and Howie blinked rapidly, stunned at what he was hearing. Elijah sang as if the stage was his home, as if the whole world had finally given him permission to breathe. His voice resonated with pain, hope, and an ache so deep it made even the back rows quiet. As he reached the chorus, his voice soared with such power that many in the audience found themselves tearing up without even realizing it. It was the kind of voice that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, the kind of voice that carried stories of hunger, sleepless nights, prayers whispered into the dark, and dreams whispered into the wind. Elijah wasn't just singing a song, he was releasing years of emotions held tightly inside a small body that life had tested far too early. In one part of the song, his voice cracked, not out of mistake, but from pure overwhelming emotion. Instead of falling apart, he stepped deeper into the feeling. The crack made his performance even more real, like a message that beauty doesn't need perfection, it needs truth. The audience felt that truth. Tears rolled down faces. Hands covered trembling lips. Some leaned on the shoulders of their loved ones, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Simon leaned back, shaking his head slowly in disbelief. He whispered something like unbelievable under his breath. Elijah continued, pouring everything he had into the final lines, building toward a note so high and full of fire that the judges could do nothing but stare. When he hit it, the room erupted. The sound seemed to vibrate through the walls, through the very heartbeats of everyone present. The music faded, but Elijah held the final note with a strength that made time feel still. For a moment, there was complete silence. No one moved, no one breathed, as if the world itself paused to honor his voice. Then, suddenly, the entire auditorium exploded into applause. People stood on their feet instantly, a full, roaring standing ovation. Some clapped wildly, some wiped tears away, others just stared with their mouths open, trying to understand how such a small boy carried such an enormous gift. Elijah stood frozen, shocked by the reaction, his hands shaking as he lowered the microphone. It was the loudest applause he had ever heard in his life. Elijah blinked rapidly as the applause washed over him like a giant wave. He wasn't used to crowds, he wasn't used to praise. Back home, he sang mostly to the sea, to the wind drifting across their small village, or to his mother while she scrubbed clothes by the river. Now thousands of people were cheering for him, some even calling out his name. He pressed his lips together, trying not to cry, but his emotions trembled visibly across his small face. The judges remained standing, clapping, their expressions glowing with awe. When the applause finally softened, Simon leaned toward the microphone, but for a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at Elijah, as though searching for the right words. It wasn't often that Simon Cowell was speechless, but the audience sensed this was one of those rare moments. Elijah shifted nervously, unsure if he should smile, bow, or simply stand still. Then Simon said softly, "That was one of the most heartfelt performances I have seen from someone your age. Your voice is incredible, but more than that, your story was in every single word you sang." Elijah's eyes lowered shyly as the crowd cheered again. Heidi placed both hands over her heart, visibly emotional. Sophia dabbed the corner of her eye with a tissue. Howie shook his head, still trying to process the depth of what they had just witnessed. Heidi leaned toward her microphone next. "Sweetheart, your voice touched my soul. It felt like your heart was singing, not just your words. You're special, truly special." Elijah swallowed hard, tears finally pooling in the corners of his eyes. He had never heard such praise in his life. Every compliment felt foreign, almost unreal, like a dream he didn't want to wake up from. Sophia added, "You made everyone here feel something deep. You brought your whole heart on this stage, and that is what makes a real star." Elijah looked toward her gratefully, nodding slightly. Howie finished with, "When someone sings from a place of real life, real pain, real hope, people feel it. And we all felt it tonight. You're amazing." Elijah breathed shakily, finally letting a single tear trail down his cheek. The audience softened noticeably, some whispering, others wiping their own tears. There was a certain purity about him, something rare, something unpolished yet radiant. His innocence, combined with the depth of his voice, created a moment that people knew would stay with them forever. Simon leaned forward again, the room falling into an eager hush. "Elijah," he said, "you came here all the way from the Philippines. You told us you wanted to give your family a better life. You said you wanted to make them proud. And let me tell you something, you just did that. You made all of us proud." Elijah's lips quivered as he pressed a hand against his chest, overwhelmed. But Simon didn't stop there. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled deeply, and said something that made the entire auditorium buzz with excitement. "You know what I think? I think this moment deserves something extra. Something huge." The audience erupted instantly, knowing exactly what that meant. People started chanting. Judges exchanged surprised glances. Elijah blinked in confusion, not believing what was happening. Simon looked at the boy once more and smiled gently. He rose from his seat. The audience screamed. Elijah's heart began pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears. Simon walked slowly toward the center of the judges' table, placing his hand above the large golden button that glowed under the bright lights. The crowd roared louder with every second. Elijah looked like he was about to faint, tears streaming freely down his cheeks now. His small hands flew to his mouth. Simon said, "Elijah, this is for your courage, your heart, and your extraordinary gift." And then he slammed his hand onto the golden buzzer. The explosion of golden confetti burst from above instantly, pouring down like a radiant waterfall. The audience screamed in joy. The judges stood cheering. The music swelled triumphantly through the auditorium, shaking the entire room with energy. Elijah froze for a second, staring up at the shimmering gold raining around him, each flake dancing in the air like tiny blessings. He covered his face with both hands, overwhelmed beyond words. His knees wobbled, and he nearly fell as he tried to look around. Backstage crew members clapped. Audience members shouted his name. Some people cried openly, watching the small boy shaking under the golden storm, finally living the moment he had prayed for so many nights. A stagehand gently helped guide him forward as the confetti thickened. Elijah slowly reached out one hand, letting the golden pieces fall into his palm. His lips trembled into a small, disbelieving smile. Everything felt magical, surreal, like he had stepped into a dream too bright to be real. Simon stepped onto the stage and approached him with open arms. Elijah rushed toward him and hugged him tightly. The audience cheered even louder. Simon held his shoulders and said something close to his ear, words the microphone barely picked up. "You are going to change your life with that voice. Remember this moment." Elijah nodded shakily, unable to speak. He wiped his tears again, breathing unevenly. The confetti continued to fall, swirling around him like golden snow. The judges waved from their table, smiling proudly. Camera operators moved around to capture every angle, knowing this footage would soon go viral around the world. As the music faded, Elijah stood there, taking it all in. The cheers, the lights, the golden storm, it was everything he had ever dreamed of but never believed he would touch. He brought his hands together, bowing deeply to the audience. The gesture was sincere, filled with gratitude that words could not express. What he didn't know was that backstage, his mother, who had come all the way but couldn't stand to watch from the crowd because she was too nervous, was crying uncontrollably. Her hands covered her mouth as she watched her son be showered with gold. She had struggled for so many years, sacrificed so much, and seeing Elijah shine like that felt like the universe finally giving her a moment of peace. As the confetti slowly settled, Elijah took one step forward and looked out at the crowd. Thousands of people stared back at him with admiration, love, and wonder. For the first time in his life, he felt seen. Not as a poor boy from a struggling village, not as a kid who had to grow too fast, but as a star. He stepped off the stage slowly, still trembling. Backstage staff clapped and congratulated him as he walked through the hall. He felt dizzy, lightheaded, barely believing any of this was real. The golden pieces stuck to his hair, his shirt, even his shoes, but he didn't brush them off. They felt like fragments of a miracle he wanted to hold onto forever. Simon watched him from the judges' table as he left the stage. He whispered something to Howie, who nodded, still amazed. Heidi wiped another tear. Sophia smiled warmly. All of them knew they had witnessed a moment that would remain etched in AGT history. Backstage, Elijah's mother rushed to him the moment he stepped behind the curtains. She pulled him into her arms and held him tightly, her tears soaking into his shoulder. He clung to her just as firmly, still trembling from the overwhelming moment he had experienced. She whispered how proud she was, how brave he had been, and how his father, wherever he was, would have been proud too. Elijah finally allowed himself to breathe, burying his face into her embrace as cameras captured the emotional reunion. Producers surrounded them with congratulations, telling Elijah that his golden buzzer moment was already trending online. Clips of him singing and crying under the golden confetti were spreading across social media within minutes. People around the world were sharing his performance, calling him the boy with the voice of an angel, the kid who sang from the heart, the child who reminded millions what pure talent looks like. Elijah sat down on a backstage bench, his hands still shaking, his eyes red from crying. He looked at his mother and whispered softly that he hoped this would help their family, that maybe now she wouldn't have to work so hard. His mother cupped his face gently and told him he had already given her the greatest gift, seeing him shine on the world's biggest stage. A staff member handed Elijah a small clear bag filled with the golden confetti that had fallen on him. He stared at it, smiling through his tears, knowing he would keep it forever. It wasn't just confetti, it was proof that his dream had touched reality, that his voice had carried him farther than he ever imagined. As they walked toward the exit doors, Elijah glanced back at the glowing stage one last time. He promised himself he would return stronger for the live shows. His heart felt light, filled with hope, purpose, and the belief that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new life not just for him, but for his whole family. Outside, the cool night air brushed against his face, calming him. His mother held his hand tightly as cameras flashed and fans called his name. And for the first time, Elijah didn't feel like a poor boy from a distant village. He felt like someone whose dream had finally opened its wings. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." And it was.